Okay, it says we're recording, so we'll make a start. Hello and welcome back to the Australian College of Physical Education and the Monday Night Coaches Club. My name is Gareth Long, and it's great to be back after a 2-month break, and it's great to see so many familiar names joining us today. Look, although things are pretty good here in Australia, we definitely recognise that many of you, including our panellists and others in different part of the world, are having probably a tougher time. So we hope that everybody is safe and well, and really appreciate you joining us today and joining in this discussion. As always, we have the chat function. Please put as many questions in there as possible. We will try to ask as many of those as possible, but as I always say, feel free to answer those questions as well. We know there's a load of experience and expertise out there. As always, I need excellent coach developers to help me run these webinars, particularly as I think I've forgotten how to do them. So it gives me great pleasure to have Drew Taylor and Chris Adams back with me today, reminding me of how we do these. Chris is an experienced coach developer, and today he's going to be monitoring the chat and selecting your questions to ask today's panelists. How's it going, Chris?
Very well, Gareth, and it's certainly good to be back, seeing some friendly faces from a few months back.
Thanks, Chris. And Drew is the player development manager at Football New South Wales, so I know this topic is particularly of interest to him. So Drew's challenge is to listen, take it all in, and make some notes at the same time so he can summarise the discussion as it progresses. Good to see you again, Drew.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. Good to be back. Really looking forward to it and excited as well to listen to both these guys and their perspectives.
Yeah, likewise. Okay, on to today's topic and our panel. Our topic today probably involves everybody who's involved in coaching, and we're going to look at coaching, developing and supporting talent. We like to have massive topics to cover in an hour and 90 minutes, between an hour and 90 minutes. And we've got two fantastic guests to help us explore this huge topic. So firstly, I'm going to introduce Richard Williams. Richard is the Head of Player Development at the Football Association of Wales. Reading his LinkedIn, it seems to be a massive job. So he'll tell us more about it as we go. But in this role, he has been the project lead on their national syllabus for the last 5 years. He also has a responsibility for the national pathway from under 13s to under 17s, but also links up with the national technical staff with the older national teams. Richard's wide role also covers driving and improving the domestic game for under 9s to under 12s. And more importantly for the coaches here in New South Wales, Richard was also previously the Director of Coaching and first team coach at Manly United. Welcome, Richard, and thank you so much for your time today.
No worries. It's good to be here.
Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. And secondly, I'm going to introduce Mark Bateman. Recently, we've stumbled across the idea of including panelists from outside football to expand the insight into a topic. In many ways, Mark reflects this as he is the lead talent coach boys and national under-18s coach for England hockey. In addition, he also works as coach developer talent for UK coaching. However, Mark also has experience in football, working as a coach mentor to Premier League academy coaches through the Elite Coach Apprentice scheme. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Mark to the panel. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Cool, thanks for having me. And I'll have to apologise now if two little children pop up at any point because they're teetering on the edge. So hopefully they stay away.
They're always welcome. They're always welcome. There's a few people probably with the door shut open. The kids don't come in, but they're always welcome. All right, well, we'll start with the first question. I'm going to pose it to Richard, and we're going to start with the big picture stuff, I suppose. So, Richard, I've already said that you were the project lead on the national syllabus. So I'd love your views on how important a national curriculum or national syllabus is in contributing to effective talent development. And if it is important, how exactly does it contribute?
Well, I think our national syllabus kind of came from us actually kind of writing down what we do. We didn't really have, we had a lot of good work going on in Wales. Guys who started kind of the process we're in at the moment. it would have been Oshan Roberts, who was our former technical director, who's now in Morocco, and Gary Speed. They were they started the process of where we are now, really. And they were doing a lot of good work, when they started. Probably would have been 07 or 08, around that time. I didn't come back from Australia until 2011, 2012, early 2012, and I started working for the FAW Trust in 2012. So there'd been about 5 years of work before I got there, certainly working with our younger age groups and trying to support our talent, I suppose, our talent ID at around 13, 14, 15, and bringing that into a national development squad at around under 15, under 16, before they move on to the, where it becomes a bit more serious under 17s, where qualification for UEFA tournaments happen, So a lot of good work was going on, and there was a lot of wins between that, 2007, 2008, and around when I came in. And then beyond that, because my first job isn't player development, it was more in coach education when I first came back, and then it evolved into a player development role. So then around, I'd say 2013, 2014, we started, we need to write this down. What's going on, we need to capture it. Number one for us, so that we can, continue to understand what we're doing well, and also what we need to change and how we can improve. And then also to try and support Wales as a nation from a domestic perspective. So we needed that to link. Now, I suppose where we found the national syllabus important and advantageous for us is number one, it makes sense of what we do, and we can try and support the domestic game with it. And number two, it has to be quite flexible, I think, because you've got a lot of coaches in Wales who've got good ideas and the way they want to play and the way they see the game. So what we decided was our national syllabus we couldn't tell people what to do. We could only guide them along the way, and that goes for our national coaches as well. So we, and a lot of our coach education also reflects this. We don't, people coming on our coach education courses, from our perspective, I'll try and explain this better. We see player development and the game driving coach education, and coach education then underpins everything that goes on. So any changes in the game, any new, not new things that go on, but any, I suppose, anything that's going on which is current and topical in football, we try and add that into the coach education process. So what's important is that the national syllabus came down on quite a general perspective in terms of principles of the game, as opposed to team shapes and tactics. So that the principles of the game, regardless of whether you're working for Ryan in the first team or whether you're working in the grassroots game and an under 9s, under 8s team, the principles of the game won't change. You still want to take the ball from the goalkeeper to the opposite end of the pitch to try and score. You want to play through teams. You still need to play away from pressure. You'll want to play away and switch play. You'll still want to try and find a numerical advantage somewhere to try and exploit. Then you'll still want to score goals. So we came down the road of 4 principles of play, which are breaking lines, switching play, creating and exploiting overloads, and the final third. And then we've also got the defensive aspects of that as well in the principles of play. So it was important. It was flexible, and then within those principles, you can go and play whatever shape you want, at any level. But the fact that you've got to try and play forward quickly with good quality won't change. The fact you've got to try and play away from the pressure when teams try and get you down one side to trap you in, to try and get out the other side, that's not going to change either. So then my next worry was, when we were doing it from a national perspective and showing people examples of how we do that with national teams, is how that would then be taken in the grassroots game. So we had to really try and link that then down through the national syllabus into the grassroots game, and and simplify it, and then also take the national syllabus and all of what we're doing within it across the coach education, so we could educate the coaches in Wales in the way we want to play. Now it's only the national syllabus has only been documented, and we just finished the second version of it in 2020. So we launched the first one around the Euros in 2016 for kind of obvious reasons. First time we got there in God knows how many years, 50 odd years. So we launched it then, and hopefully we're starting to see people coming through now using the language that's in the national syllabus, understanding more of what we're talking about. We use modelling a lot in terms of it all coming down from the national game, you know, and what's important in the national game. So yeah, I think it's an important piece of work to try and tie in the country, but also being flexible to what coaches and players need, so that we don't kind of pigeonhole people down one road, you know.
Yeah, no, thank you, Richard. That's a really good answer. It's interesting now how it's tied in. The player development is clearly tied in with coach education, and clearly a desire to affect all parts of the game, right down to the grassroots level. That's an interesting approach, I think. Lovely, thank you. Mark, I just looked at this question. I realised it's a horrible question because there's about 3 parts to it. So, but I'm not changing it because I've written it down now, so I'm going to ask it anyway. The first part is probably, you know, we're really interested in what hockey has done really well in the last few years to progress its ability to develop talent. And then I suppose attached to that, you know, from your perspective, is there anything you think football could adopt? Or flip it around, is there something football does really well that you wish hockey could adopt? So if you can remember all 3 parts of that question, I'd love you to have a go at answering it.
Cool. So from a talent development perspective, I think probably hockey's evolved from sort of 2012 onwards, was probably quite seismic compared to maybe where it was prior to that. So I think they've been on the journey for a good number of years, and we're probably now going through a further evolution of where we would want to go to. But what I can do is give you a bit of the historical context from sort of 2012 onwards. We had a new PD join. I say join. He was the ex head coach of the ladies and then took on the PD role, and he really aligned or wanted to draw together this idea around coaching and its impact on players with a view to talent development, which might sound quite sort of normal, but I think at times performance and talent performance departments and coach education departments can work sort of not against each other but quite siloed. So we really drew all that together and set people on a journey which has been quite up and down. So I think in the infancy they really went down a games based only. Weren't necessarily prescriptive in that, as this is the only way, but people definitely sort of thought that was, sort of people interpreted that as being the only way of coaching. So first of all, they really tried to change their coaching philosophy, which I think was important, because prior to that we'd really been quite prescriptive, as in, you know, even to the point of in some of the sort of the level below England age group, the JLPC level, it was you do this skill at this time and this session on this day. Like literally it devolved decision making and professional judgment from all coaches, regardless of level that you're on. So they really look to improve the level of coaching, really looking at the how. So how do you coach? So moving to definitely a more questions based, athlete centered approach, and also a lot of the sort of what or why we coach. So really looking to support development of sort of athletes, players, people. So that was a big journey. They totally restructured the qualification system. So you removed levels, made it more bespoke to almost the environment that you operate in. Actually changed it from sort of coach education to coach development, i.e. we're coming on the journey with you as opposed to dictating to you. And similarly to Richard, actually started to evolve a more principle-based approach to how we play the game. And quite simply, it's choose the best option to go forward and stop there, go forward was sort of like the real basic nuances of what we were looking for. Now we're now iterated, and we're on another journey where we're looking at how we evolve the talent system to best support or to provide the best environments for athletes to enable them to get the best possible experience, be it where they are, be it whether that involves being in a different club, how we shape the club environment, how we evolve sort of what you would call the performance pathway and what that looks like. So that's that's a massive piece of work that we're currently undertaking. but also looking to evolve people's approach to coaching to really help them improve their ability to make good decisions around what and how they coach. It's not just about games. So depending on the diet that the player that you're working with requires, it may need something that's around technical shaping, but it may also need a lot of time around games to enable decision making to occur. So it's looking at what are the various like nuances to coaching and ways and approaches to coaching that are required to really help support the athlete, right time, right place, phase of season, like time of the week, etc., to make some really good decisions around those players. And it's also about broadening. Yes, we've got a set of principles, but we also need to help support with different ways of how to play the game. So helping support with various skills and also tactical sort of upskilling of coaches. So not necessarily saying this is how you play the game, but certainly ensuring they know different ways of playing the game to enable people to then support athletes with understanding that. And particularly with the nature of the game at the moment has really evolved into quite a strict zonal marking system. And that's evolved from sort of quite strict man-to-man. So actually it's been quite seismic over the last probably 3 or 4 years. I mean, there have been a couple of teams that have been quite zonal for the entire program, but people started to switch to that. So really helping support coaches to understand the minutiae detail around how those different systems work is also quite a key thing. So that's sort of our journey of evolving talent. It's definitely about being athlete centered. It's definitely about understanding that people develop at different rates in different ways and through different experiences. So how can we provide those, which I think it's pretty important. There isn't a one size fits all. And we are evolving and getting better at bracing different routes and different opportunities. And that's sort of where the evolution of the talent system is going to be, in that you don't necessarily, I suppose at the moment, you enter the pathway, and once you're in, you've got a much greater chance of making it to an England level is if you're not in. Whereas we want to try and open the talent system out, so there's more opportunities for players to come in and out and in and out. We kind of, our hand was forced this year in some respects. We normally have like your typical end of cycle massive tournament where we would go and assess players, but obviously COVID put an end to that. So we ended up having a national sort of scouting, national trials process where people nominated, seconded, and then we looked at 800 athletes over 6 days all around the country, which was definitely a different way of doing things, and will inform some of what we do going further. And again, as I alluded to at the start, we really understand that coaching is at the core of this. So without highly skilled, highly competent coaches, you are going to struggle to have the reach and the intentional support to players. A lot of them will just get there by chance if there isn't really good coaching. We're also looking at sort of one key other way really is around sort of the fundamentals, so the hockey fundamentals, and making sure we support coaches with that. It's probably a pretty long-winded answer. It's quite a complex subject, I suppose. So that's where we're at for that.
It wasn't long-winded. It was really interesting. But I'm going to come back to you, Mark, because you're in obviously a room of soccer coaches. But part of the question was what's hockey doing that you think football could learn from, or what would you love to steal from football? So I'm gonna almost push you.
I think I'll probably jump on the latter purely because, quite selfishly, I'm leading a project around trying to implement a national scouting network and the processes and systems with that to support our evolution of our talent system. So we are looking at how we better identify players in the environments that they're in, generally around sort of high, really, really good quality clubs, and we're looking at how we sort of really implement a system of scouting. So I think that's something which football does well. Certainly, it does it. I don't think we don't do it particularly well. It's quite ad hoc. It's more about me speaking to people that I trust and know, as opposed to us really having a system that's sort of nationwide and transparent. So we're looking at how we evolve that and bring something in. So I think that's something which hockey will definitely be learning from, mainly because the two sports are quite similar in some respects. So it's important to learn from what football have done and how they've done it. It's fortunate that I work with Nick Levette, who's quite instrumental in implementing the first or an iteration of a talent scouting program within the FA. So consistently drawing on him for some of his knowledge and some of the pitfalls within that. But what could football learn from hockey? I think football can learn from hockey is that hockey's pretty open. So I can contact the senior men's head coach and have a chat with him and ask for information and get footage. Where I think football can definitely be pretty closed in terms of quite secretive, quite protective. And I get it; it's different. There's multi-million-pound 12-year-olds flying around, and they don't want those players to lose. But even within academies, a bit of experience from the ones I've been into, and the two can be like the academy can be quite shut off from the first team and the under 23s at times. And I think just being a bit more open to within your area, being able to sort of communicate and work with each other. But it's difficult to compare because football is so big compared to hockey. Yes, we're similar sports, but like there's sort of the sheer volume of people that play compared to hockey is sort of quite vast. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm at thinking with it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for allowing me to come back at you there. I appreciate that. Yeah, really interesting. Clearly, the similarity between yours and Richard's answer on the importance of coaches and tying in with that coach education system. But I'm hoping someone puts a question in there about how that assessment tournament works and how what you're looking for and how you look for it. I'm hoping someone puts a question in there, but I'll move on to Richard. So Richard, the last question was sort of at a national level, and I suppose we're going down now to thinking about particular talent development environments. So in your experience, what does a coaching program look like in an effective talent development environment, whether that's academies or your own national camps?
Just to kind of, I'll just share screen quickly, right? For my trail of thought on this one, because it's a huge thing. But I've got something that we use just to remind me of what we need to do. So we're done with it. Oh, there it is. A screenshot there. So hang on, I'll do this. Get that across there or something. How do I get that across? You see that?
I can see like a I suppose what I call a spider diagram or something.
Yeah. So yep. I use this, right? So as far as I'm concerned, can you see that all right? Those are too small. Can I make it bigger or what?
Press the green top left green button. Will make it big.
Yeah, I'll just do that. Yeah, might be too. Can you see that?
Yeah. I can see it. Yep.
Yeah. Cool. This the way I look at it is that we have to. We've got this in a better format to this. This is just something that I always kind of use when we're coming up to camps and when we're thinking about our programs and our coaching programs, anything that goes around it. We tend to kind of think, right, we put the player in the middle, and then we put everything around them. You may have seen something similar to this before in terms of what that support looks like, and I suppose this is a bit of a snapshot of that. And I honestly feel that this they're all as important as each other if you're going to do all right. When you're developing players and putting some kind of talent development program together, so you can see around that, But before I go into that, there's the next part of this is that we always talk to the players about this. Look, when you come into us, we're going to try and provide you with the best experience, best environment, and hopefully support you to try and improve and get better and give you a really good experience, so that when you're coming through programs that you can build on those experiences understand it better. So when you move through that program, it's normal to go from the 17s to the 19s. It's the same, you know, it's normal whether you go to the you know, some go from the 19s to the first team, 17s to the first team. Nothing should really change in terms of the way they're taught. Yeah, there'll be certain things within the tactical plans for certain games which are going to be different, but hopefully we've supported them along that one as well. So the major one for me in this is the player in the middle. We always talk to them about, you know, they have to come to the party as far as I'm concerned. We will provide a great experience, a great environment, but it's really important that when they come into that environment that they come to the party and they give everything, you know, and most of it, you know, when we talk to players about what you want to do in this camp, you know, what are your goals for this camp? A lot of it will be, they'll come out with things that they can't really control. So we always try and bring them back to what they can control within the environment. So for instance, if we're giving them the opportunity to go and reflect and reflect properly in terms of making sense of sessions, making sense of games, whatever that is, then they've got to commit to it. They've got to do it properly. You know, if it's rest, if it's recovery, they've got to really commit to it and control it and commit to the training sessions, you know, commit to the 1v1 feedback sessions, unit sessions, whatever we do with them, they've got to come to the party and they've got to give everything. Otherwise, you know, they probably won't come through, you know, unless they are super talented and, you know, one or two slip through because they're just that good, and they can get away with odds and ends. But I think what's important, you know, in this is that everything comes together. You know, you have to have that's you know, that sports science, that medical support, and it has to be good. You have to have really good people in your environment to drive that and to really integrate what they want into the bigger picture. You know, you honestly, you don't understand how important team ops is. That team operations, that's a massive part of making sure that everything's smooth, making sure there's no excuses for players, making sure there's no excuses for staff, because footballers will quite easily and quite quickly make excuses if things don't go well. So you've got to make sure you take the excuses away. You know, performance analysis goes, you know, you can't get away from performance analysis these days. Massive part of certainly young players understanding their game, understanding how it links to the bigger picture. You know, we use a lot of modeling in our program. So, you know, with the 15s and 16s, I'll use the 17s, 19s, 21s first team to get buy-in so that they can see the pathway. So if you don't have that clear understanding of what it looks like, then it's very hard to model for the younger players. You know, performance psychology, we're literally we do this. Performance psychology is such a huge part of what you need to do in a talent development program. But again, we do it. We actually, in the last 2 weeks, is something for our next maybe 3-6 months, in terms of putting, similarly to the national syllabus, we do a lot of good things in terms of performance psychology, but we haven't got it written down anywhere. We don't really make sense of it in terms of a periodized approach to it. So that's something that we're gonna start now. Like I said, we do it, but we're gonna have a more periodized approach, and we've linked up with a university, or one of the professors who's worked with us for a long time in coach education, and he's doing some good research with some of his students on it. So we're really going to try and drill into that performance psychology part of the programs. And then the club relationships, we're probably quite unique. I don't know. Well, yeah, Australia may have a few of these, but all our players, well, the majority of our players, not all of them, because we have some good Welsh Premier League or Cymru Leagues academies, and we do have some players come through that program, but we're in Wales, everybody plays in England and Scotland. Do you know what I mean? So they don't play, none of our best players play in Wales, you know, unless they play for Cardiff, Newport, Swansea, Wrexham to a certain extent, and we have a couple of Welsh Cymru Leagues academies who are pretty much full time in TNS and Connors Quay. Then the chances are they're across the bridge playing, you know. So we have to have great club relationships. So, you know, linking learning between the National Association and the clubs. That's a huge part of my job, and that's been a big part of my job in this lockdown period, because we can still do that. A lot of the clubs will still let you in to watch games and to talk to the coaches. So just making sure that, you know, whatever player playing for Man United, playing for Liverpool, Arsenal, whoever they're playing for, that we have a good understanding of, you know, their learning that's happening at the club, so we can try and link it to what we do in the national environment. And that's getting far more challenging, because across the last 10 years, our talent ID has really kind of gone through the roof in terms of players that are Welsh eligible but live in England. And then you've obviously got the physical performance nutrition. You know, we try and support the players with that. our education and player welfare for the younger players is really important. You know, we've had kids on camp doing GCSEs in the past because it's just clashed with the camp. So we've got to make sure that so we have all that in place, and certainly the player welfare bit. You know, you never know what's going to happen on camp. So when they come into us, if they're away for 10 days, you know, it's really important that we have that support for them so that they can feel safe in the environment. And also the other way in terms of supporting them around, you know, not getting caught on social media doing things silly, and making sure that they, you know, they're good people when they come into the camps, and they don't, I suppose, stitch themselves up in silly ways on social media. And then the coaching program, you know, very, very principle based. Within our principles, we have, you know, very general sessions which are principle based sessions. You know, possession sessions, passing practices, wave games, small sided games which are principle based on whatever we're working on. But then obviously that has to link to game strategy. So any sessions that we ever do are always framed before we go out on the pitch, because I want the players to have a really good understanding of how it links to the game model, regardless of what we're doing. So we'll show the session, we'll show all that links to the game model in game model clips, and then obviously when we come back in to reflect from those sessions, we can show some good practice, and then again link it back to the game model. This is why we're doing this. The principle-based approach is more about decision making than anything else, really. It's about making sure we've got good decision makers, understanding when to play forward, when to switch play, you know, when to create that 2v1 or that 3v2, whatever it is. A million things that you can work on, but that has to link to the game model in terms of what we want to do. But you know, you can see there in possession, out of possession, in transition, and then I suppose from my perspective, especially when you get into the more kind of the pointy end of player development, when it comes to the 16s, 17s, 18s, when they're starting to become young pros, that kind of thing. For us in the international game, it's always going to be about providing those experiences. So it's all right saying, you know, Wales are quite a small nation. We don't traditionally qualify for big tournaments at any level. We've started to do that at the first team level now, and we want to make sure that becomes normal with our 19s, 17s, 21s, you know, in those kind of age groups. We want to try and support the players so that that's quite a normal thing to do across the next 5 to 10 years, you know. I suppose coming down from what the first team have done. And the only way we get to do that is to provide those experiences at the international level, because it is a step up for a lot of players. You know, there's not a player that comes into our camps and we go play France, Germany, Holland, Belgium, any of those, Switzerland, and it's a quicker game. It's a step up for the players, so they have to have those experiences and understand and make sense of those experiences. So the games program is fundamental, as far as I'm concerned. Our aim is to get our international players, from the time they come into us as 15, 16s, to the time they go into the first team, around 35 international youth caps. And we can try and control that. You know, it's no point in us saying, look, we want to win that tournament, because, or qualify from that group, because at times that's not going to happen. For whatever reason, you can't completely control that situation, you know. But what we can do is, if we don't qualify, make sure that we get meaningful internationals for them, so that friendly internationals or friendly tournaments. So we are still giving them those experiences. But the main thing, I suppose, is we want to try and get through those tournaments, because then that gives the players more experiences to draw from, and to understand. And I don't particularly care if we get battered or if we win. I don't care. It's all about managing experiences for players. And if the challenge is huge and you're playing France away and you get beat 4-0, then the support needs to be equally as important from us as a staff, so that, you know, when the players are coming off the pitch and they've got battered 4-0, they need to be able to make sense of that and understand why, and understand, you know, their part in it as individuals, but then how that then links to the bigger picture. So hopefully that's answered your question. Long-term player development is exactly that. With player development, for me, you can't think about the next game. You've got to think about that player's journey through, I suppose, from our perspective, from a 13, 14-year-old through to a first team player, and that could be anything from 4 or 5 years to maybe 8 or 9 years. So I think it's a really important. The games program is a really important part of that, so that we can make sure that those experiences are consistently there for them. But like I said at the beginning of that answer, the player has to come to the party. I mean, they have to control what they can control and do it well. So hopefully that answers that question.
It more than answers it. Are you able to stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, I just did that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just pulled it off there.
I can still see it.
You can still see it?
I can.
Huh? I can just see everybody now, everybody on the call.
Maybe.
We need to make sure it's off. Definitely.
There we go. Did I disappear for a bit?
No, you're there. You're all right.
Did you hear me swear? Drew, was okay? I was all right. Look, thank you for that, Richard. Thank you for sharing it, and that really helped to see all the pieces of the jigsaw, I suppose. And I've got quite a few questions on there, but I saw it generated some questions into the chat, so I'll leave them for that. Mark, we're sort of narrowing down now. We've gone from a national perspective into a talent development environment, and now my question to you is, I guess, about the coach who operates in those talent development environments. So, again, from your perspective, what does an effective coach do in a talent development environment? And I suppose as part of that, what do you consider effective pedagogy within that environment?
Yeah, really good. And what I would probably draw on is some of the work we do around supporting coaches to understand effective TDEs. So, and definitely look at some of the work by Dave Collins from a pedagogical point of view, and his sort of his sort of 5 areas around effective TDEs. So first of all, and again, thinking about this, I won't necessarily make it explicit, but this is from how will a coach need to operate, or what will his view need to be within the talent development environment. So first of all, it's really about a long-term nature. So if you think about performance compared to talent, performance can definitely be about the next game or this season, or essentially around how we perform, how we win, how we succeed. Talent development environments are about really how we support the transition of really effective players up through into next environments to make them the best players they can be with you at that time. And it's definitely around having a vision and a purpose and an identity around that being what you're about. I'm a strong believer with this long-term nature, again, around systematic planning and real implementation of that plan. So nobody ever got good at something just by chance, particularly in a coaching environment. It's about being really intentional with how you're going to coach so that you can support people, and it's planned out. Yes, there'll be bumps and things that will come at you along the way, but you've definitely got to think about how you can support the development of them through really high quality planning. And then there's also reinforcement across a variety of levels. So, for example, I think Richard alluded to it around the modelling. So being able to see that what goes on in your environment, particularly if we're talking about pathways or club academies, that what goes on above you is synonymous with what happens. So the standards are the same. So actually people get consistency with how it looks and feels. The second point would really be around coherency, and that's particularly around the messages and the level of support. So as I just alluded to, using those role models at a variety of levels. So can they see the next stage? Can they see the end in mind? So can they see the first team, or can they see the senior team, but can they also see what's above them? Or can you role model within your environment? Looking at how you can support and set up sort of a range of support networks to help the players within that environment. So yes, it's not just about the coach. Actually, is the coach able to pull on other avenues of support to help? So I think if we're in, particularly when you look at the model that Richard showed there, that's absolutely wonderful in a national age group. But I think we've also got to think about what does it look like in grassroots teams that are good at supporting talented players that produce them. So what level of support, who might they use? That might be a parent who's got some knowledge of something, or it might be trying to bring in another coach to help because they've got a specialism in one area, or it might just be being more aware of what's going on from the people you're working with from an education perspective, what's going on at school, home life. So really looking at that range of support networks. And then I think the big thing for me around sort of coherent messages and support is just forums for honest and open communication. That's not that's not blunt and brutal, but it is open and honest. So we have to be able to make sure that we're gaining trust through being honest and having communication that is two-way and really open. My third point would really be around this whole notion of being individualized, which even within team games, you can be individualized with your coaching approach. And that's about de-emphasizing winning as success during this development phase. So, but I think for me also on that, it's not about saying winning doesn't matter. It's about how you learn to win a game. Because ultimately you go and play a game or you do a sport, and to be successful in that. So obviously we wanted to develop talent. So talent is ultimately going to be successful. They got to learn how to win, but we're not necessarily that fussed if they don't win in that environment, if that makes sense. So thinking about that, clear expectations, and definitely working with people on an individual basis to know what the bigger picture is. So actually the here and now is important for this, but this is where we want you to get to. And actually this bump here or this setback here or this deselection here could still potentially help you get to where you want to get to. So that's really, really important. And then my third one really around individualize is encouraging autonomy in their learning. So how can you help shape them to be able to take control of parts or elements of their learning and their development? And there's a difference between, oh, go on, just figure it out for yourself, and all versus actually I'm going to support you to help you figure it out for yourself, with a view to in the long run you can take that on. I think sometimes it's like saying people just figuring it out for themselves is almost like the new drill. So sticking someone in a game and saying, oh, they're just figuring it out for themselves is actually just like making people run around cones, because they're still not thinking, because at times they need help, support, scaffolding to shape some of the ways in which they might navigate that, or you might need to design the practice better. Whereas I think as we're moving up and down these continuums at like breakneck pace, as opposed to trying to operate somewhere in the middle and picking the right things, we can be definitely guilty of that and seeing that within coaches. And my fourth bit really would be around how appropriate it is. So supporting individuals through key transitions. I think we could probably spend about 5 hours talking about just how we transition people in, out, through clubs, environments, programs. So that's really important. Goal setting and reviews. So actually making sure those appropriately timed, appropriate in terms of what the goal is. And then just a flexible system. And I think that's something where hockey is trying to really get to, is around it not being quite fixed and closed as a pathway. It being really flexible to allow for different levels of development, people dropping in and out, late developers, trying to make the system as flexible as you can possibly do it. And that's really looking at how it's ongoing, it's integrated, it's holistic, and it's sort of systematic. So it doesn't just happen by chance. It has to really be orchestrated and planned by the coaches, by people involved in pathway, running the pathway. I think that's really important, and I see that across a multitude of sports around how intentional people are with their planning to support the development of others. I think, without going into ridiculous detail, I think that hopefully that kind of covers off the key bits.
It does, Mark. Thank you very much. And look, Mark and Richard have a little break at the moment, and now probably the toughest job of anyone. I'm going to ask Drew to. I know he's probably gone through 3 pads already, but I'm going to ask Drew to pick out some of the major points, just so we can sort of summarise where we are at the moment. And I know following that we'll have. Chris has told me that there's some great questions and some people prepared to ask them. So we'll go from Drew to Chris and get some questions from the coaches watching.
All right. I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going to struggle to summarize this because there's been so much that's good, but I'm going to give it a go, and that might fly through it, but hopefully some things are picked out. So I guess the bit coming through both of it is that idea that it doesn't happen by chance. So there needs to be a framework, the importance of a syllabus being there, but that would be flexible, probably principles based, but ultimately driven by player development and what's actually required for the players. And then looping back to coaching being at the core of how you're going to develop that framework, and the importance of coaches, but still based on the needs of players. and bespoke, both to the needs of those players and coaches. And I thought it was interesting around Mark saying there around that removing of the levels within coach education, which is probably different to the football world. So definitely something to consider. I guess it links in with that idea of tactics within sports evolve so quickly, but the basic principles remain. So with player development, as we know, being a long-term thing, if you constantly need to update an entire curriculum or syllabus, you potentially can't keep up with it. But if it's got a degree of flexibility, then that can. And then how that then links your performance phase or performance teams back to the grassroots level, with a clear framework and open communication to make sure that they can link. And then a bit that I thought quite an interesting point there around, well, if you do put the player at the centre, that importance still of them coming to the party, so them controlling what they can control, that it can't just be handed to them and won't be, that there needs to be buy-in. And then the rest of a system to support that journey, the importance of the use of modelling and role modelling that both of them talked about, but also linking to Mark's talking about the importance of sharing across different environments, which is, I would agree, something that probably doesn't happen enough, but when it does happen can be pretty useful, important. And then that's also that link and learn idea between club relationships, but that's probably up and down a pathway, but potentially sideways as well if player development actually is the things that we're trying to support. And then finally, that importance of open and honest communications, clear expectations, but also autonomy of learning for players, and then an individualized coaching approach to make sure that while winning is important, it's more about how to win that's being developed. There you go.
Great job, mate. Great job. I don't know how you do that. Really impressive. Chris, over to you, mate.
We've got some great questions coming in. We're going to start with one of our regulars, Pete Nowakowski. Pete, if you want to jump off and ask your question, Pete.
Hey guys, great to be back on the Monday Night Coaches Club. So question for yourself there, Richard, was with your giant diagram that you just showed there with your player-centered approach, one of the little offshoots you had was really about parent education and parent kind of engagement. So I guess the biggest question for me is, what does that look like? And then is that something that you feel like more federations or more groups should really be investing in as part of that player journey, is ensuring that there is that education module?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. It's a tough area really, but it's something I think you have to kind of commit to a little bit. So I think the parents, they're so invested. Parents, families, it may not be parents, could be guardians, whoever that is. The families of the players are so important in supporting them that you have to bring them through the journey as well. So when we have a regional program, North and South, which starts when the players are around 13, under 14, and then they become the first kind of national development group at around 15. So there's always parent education about what that regional program is and where it sits in the pathway and where it supports their regular club football, how hopefully we add value to that process for them. So they have to understand, and also there's a little bit around managing expectation with them as well, because we have had parents in the past where the kids have come into us at 13 or 14 and they've played like a regional game for us, and the parents have gone back to the club and said, well, he's playing for Wales now. What can you do for him? So there's managing expectation a little bit for parents in terms of where they are in the bigger picture, and also I suppose what will be expected of the players through the program, and how they can help support them in terms of making sure they kind of ask the right questions of players when they leave camps, when they leave games, if those camps have gone well, if those camps have been tough. So it's important that we try and support the parents to kind of ask the right questions of players, when they're driving back from a 3-hour camp, driving 3 hours back from from a 4-day camp, so that those conversations with the players are probably at the right level, and for the players to try and understand as well. So we do a little bit of that, and then the next thing is, after the regional program is it becomes a little, the regional program, there are around 100 players across 2 age groups, so about 24 in 2 groups in the south and 24 2 groups in the north, and then it becomes, that then gets kind of whittled down as they get towards 15s and 16s, so around 32 players. So again, when they come into the national program, again, there's a slightly different expectation. There's and the parents need to know that, the program, now you're going away to play Switzerland, Slovakia, you're going to the Eastern Bloc to play games, which are always fantastic games and really tough games for us, but also really, really tough experiences for the players, because they're away from home. They could be away from home for 6-7 days, traveling through airports, into hotels, different food, different cultures, which is what we always try and make that experience, if we do go abroad with these players, a cultural experience as well, in terms of understanding what that country's about. A bit of the history, go to the major city or the town that's around that, whatever we're playing, so we try and make it inclusive for the players from a social experience as well. But yeah, I think you have to take the parents on the journey with you, because they are with the parent, they're with them a lot more than they're with us, so they have to have a good understanding of where we're coming from and how to support the players through the process as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much for that, Richard. Now, I guess to kind of bounce off that for you, Mark, personally, you mentioned a bit more of that grassroots approach, and Richard there mentioned about, the 3-hour car ride home. And I know that, for instance, Nick DeMoore, he definitely works with plenty of regional players and coaches around. So I guess from a hockey perspective, and yourself there, Mark, what does that look like in terms of your parent education or your parent engagement model in hockey?
Yeah, so from a national team perspective, we have quite a broad parent education program. So we have quite a broad education program for the players, and the parents will get a similar version of that in terms of topic areas, but more attuned to what the parents will need to know and how they need to operate to support the players, and echoing a lot of the thoughts and comments of Richard really around. Parents are ultimately the people that spend their most time with the athletes, and at times the most influential people. So if they are an antagonist with us, then they can be quite difficult. So it's about actually supporting them and building that engagement with them first, and then helping support them from a skills knowledge base to then better to support the athletes. I also think at times, particularly some of the work from the EIS is around parents. They'll just be doing what they think is the best, regardless. You might think that they're being a pain in the backside, but ultimately, a lot of the times you'll find being a performance parent is new to the parent. So they've not had 2 or 3 kids before that have been performance athletes. They'll probably have 1. So actually, they're figuring it out as they go along as much as anybody else. And at times, I think in a coaching space, coaching domain, we sometimes forget that. We think that they should be aligned with us. So yeah, always sort of sense checking yourself of, well, actually, yeah, that they're new to this they're as new to it as their son or daughter is when they come into the program. I think from a grassroots perspective, it's a bit different around parent education. I think it's definitely a challenge in that, I'm a parent, and sometimes that hour where I take my kids to a sports practice, I'm not that interested. I just want an hour's peace. So, and I'm a keen coach. So I think it's about if you to work on educating parents, it's managing expectations around what you expect you're going to do with them. Actually, just having a good relationship with them is really good. Knowing their name, being able to say hello, saying this is what we're doing, this is what the program looks like. I think that's a good start. Before we go down the route of like getting them all in and doing all this sort of loads of onerous education stuff, and it might be sort of softly drip feed type situation from a grassroots perspective. I think it's still important. You can do it, but there's definitely a different way of going about doing it from the level where I would probably spend a lot of my time. I'm probably more a parent at grassroots than I am coach, so which is a whole nother program of Coaches Club.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate that.
Pete, you had one question, but you stole the second one. That's okay. So are we up next? We've got Nick Demore. Nick, if you want to jump up, because I think you've got one for both of the guys. So if you want to fire away, Nick. Nick, is Nick there still?
I think Nick's on mute.
It's all right. I'll blame Drew for that. Morning, gents. What are your thoughts on managing games and programs for players and coaches that have to travel long distances? In Australia, they can travel over 3 hours to attend an elite game.
Happy to kick off, Richard. Yeah. Well, I've been in a similar position myself. So as a player, I played in the National Premier League, and we'd have games in Canterbury, and I live in like Manchester, so 4 or 5 hours to play a game. It's a real challenge, I think. It's about, there's a number of things to think about. It's about what can you do remotely from things such as team meetings, education, performance analysis type things. I think certainly COVID's forced people's hands around trying to be innovative around some of those things, so that you're almost reducing elements of time being away. It's about an education process around how do you cope with the travel aspects. So how do you support players to understand when they need to take rest? How do you support players to understand what nutrition they need to have so that they're arriving primed and ready to actually play? I mean, we'll have national camps, which we'll see again, players turn up at 10 o'clock and they might have been up at 5. And then the first thing we'll probably do is fitness testing, because we want them to be as fresh in theory as they can be. And then some of them, obviously, if they don't prepare properly, that's highly apparent when we sort of see the evidence on the pitch. So I think there's definitely an education piece around helping them to best prepare. I think it's difficult to remove it, because the better you get as a performer, the smaller the number of people, which means the less regional it's going to be. So I think it's more around the education to support them to be able to manage this as being just a part of the performance journey. I don't know if that helps, or what Richard's thoughts are on it.
Yeah, very, very similar, mate. When it becomes the national groups, you're not going to get away from travel when it becomes our national groups, because they have to come into central areas. You're always going to be kind of traveling, but because at the national squads, that's not weekly. That's very sporadic throughout the year, so it's not something that happens on a weekly basis. Now, I think there is a problem then when it's a weekly program and you've got players traveling big distances in a weekly program, especially if they're still in school. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think a lot of what happens in England and Wales in football, there's a cut-off in terms of travel time. So, for instance, if they're an under 14, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but if they're an under 13, under 14, they can only travel within an hour of their home to an academy or to a program. I think it gets a bit, as you get older, it gets a bit further. And the Category 1 academies, when it gets to a certain point, they can travel from anywhere. But a lot of the time, then they're gonna bring them into accommodation close to the academy. But I think it's a real challenge when you've got even kids, traveling an hour and a half to a training session when they're still in school, and they're not, they're leaving school, traveling to a session, they're 2 hours at the session, traveling home, getting up at midnight or whatever it is, and then having to get up for school the next day. I think that's really tough. Now, we've got kind of a situation in Wales like that with our girls' regional programs. So what we've done in terms of that kind of remote learning that we just talked about is we've got boys Cymru Leagues academies around Wales, and some of them are kind of in the more remote areas like Aberystwyth or Newtown, which are central Wales. There's some of the girls will be living in those areas, but we've got academies in those areas. So instead of coming into us twice a week or 3 times a week, then they'll do one of their sessions at their local boys academy, which gives them a really good challenge, a different challenge. And obviously this isn't everybody. This is very much an individual thing for certain individual players within those programs. But For me, on a weekly basis, the less travel, the better, as far as I'm concerned. The less travel, the better.
Thanks, Richard.
What
Thanks
about,
for your question, Nick.
oh, sorry, I had a part B of it.
This is a trend, isn't it? Go on, part B.
It was just regarding the elite games and bringing them in. So how important do you feel bringing them in to benchmark the players are?
For the elite games, like the national teams.
Yeah.
So, and in terms of benchmarking, what do you mean by benchmarking? In what context?
So getting them to play the best against the best.
Oh, in terms of selection.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we only do that. We only do that once, really, in terms of selection processes. And to be honest, a lot of the time, that kind of event that we hold is you're kind of looking for the last 10, because usually we've usually earmarked the first, say, 16, 18 because of the amount of time we invest in going to the clubs to watch the players. So we have to have really good relationships with all of our clubs, so that we're regularly making sure we monitor and have conversations with those players at their clubs, and that's from quite an early age, from that 13, 14 age group. But then the best versus best situation happens once for us, so that we can benchmark. But I suppose what's important is for us is that if you're Welsh, if you're eligible to play for Wales, and you're in the professional game, you're playing in the professional game, and you're in the professional games program, then you're not going to be far from our minds. We haven't got a huge amount of players to pick from. You're never going to be that far away. So it's really important the players understand that if they don't make camps, they don't make selection for a certain camp or a certain games program, whatever we're doing at that point, that if they keep working at their clubs, there's a good chance they're going to come in at some point. Because I suppose this kind of natural selection, as it gets to the more pointy end of the groups of the player development process, you've only got a certain amount of players left anyway, because some of them have probably been released by clubs and are now not playing at the level that you need them to be playing at regularly to play international football. So I think we're a little bit different. Our earlier camps are bigger than our later camps. Our earlier camps, we bring in more players, maybe I suppose to benchmark a little bit. But a lot of the time, when it gets to the international level, when they get to that kind of 16, 17s age group, we find that doesn't really change much then through the national pathway. It doesn't change a lot. We have quite a big transition from 17s to 18s, 18s to 19s, quite big numbers in terms of those players coming through that pathway.
It's interesting. Thanks, Richard. Nick, thank you for part A and part B. Appreciate that. Chris, if we just hold fire on the questions, there's another opportunity at the end, so keep hold of any of the good ones, and please, everybody out there, keep them coming as well. It's great to hear the questions that we hadn't thought of, so I really appreciate that. Richard, I'm going to come back to you. But I think you may have answered it, so I may have to reword it a little bit if you think I have. The question is, how important is success at national youth level? And if you think you've sort of answered that, because when I wrote that, I was thinking I had success as winning. But maybe the question should be reframed and say, well, what is success at national youth level and throughout that national pathway, perhaps?
It's tough. It's a really tough one, because short-term success at international level supports long-term success, because we only really the under 17s is the first age group where winning is important, really. So everything up until then, I suppose you're supporting the players to try and go to win that first tournament, because what happens if you win and go, not win, but qualify through tournaments? It doesn't necessarily mean you win the group or whatever, but if you go through that first tournament, it's twofold, really. Number one, your coefficient goes up in terms of your seeding in Europe, which means next time you go into a draw, you may get a more favourable draw. You may be in a more favourable pot, which means you may be second seed instead of third seed. So you don't get two monsters of the game in Europe. You only get one, which gives you a better chance to maybe go through that tournament. And if you go through that tournament, obviously, then the major one for me is the coefficient is big, because what we want to do is to be competing at that level more often, so that those experiences for the players are more regular. They put under that kind of pressure to make sense of that pressure more regularly. So we want it to become normal for us to go through that first round of qualifying in any of these European tournaments, for the coefficient reason, but also then you go to the next tournament, then you've got another 3 unbelievable games for the players to have to go through, and also for the coaches to go through, because the coaches may not have got to that level yet either. So it's important that the coaches, are able to challenge themselves at that level. The players are able to challenge themselves. All of the staff now at a different level, so that you get that kind of ongoing challenge, making sense of it, reflecting from it, and support. And then having to plan differently at times, depending on where you're going, what that tournament looks like, who you're playing. So there's lots of different kind of little add-ons to winning, winning games and going through groups. I'd say it's probably the only, if I was working at club level at under 17, under 18, under 16, under 17, 18, it's not as important. I don't think winning at all costs isn't as important. It's not. We don't have to win at all costs, really. We've got to win the way we play and the way we want to do things in our process. But in the bigger picture, it is important. It is important to go through those groups and to progress, for the experiences, and to try and give yourselves a better chance then of going through more groups further along, so that we get those players to a level where they're getting 30 to 35 meaningful international youth caps before they go onto the national stage. I did a piece of research around this on my pro license, in terms of what European teams, the kind of average youth caps that the European teams that get to the point at the end of all tournaments, how many youth caps they get really before they go into before they get to the first team. And it's easily 30 to 35 as a minimum. Some will be less because they get to the first team earlier. We've got one, Ethan Ampadu. He's been with our first team for probably 3 years now. He only had one. I think he had one under 19s cap, maybe a couple of under 17s caps. But because he was that good, he went straight to the first team. So he's been getting his experience in the first team, but they can't all do that. So yeah, it's an important part of the process, that cap accumulation that we use to support the players through the international environment, and hopefully then that adds value as well, because it's different to their club environment. When they come to us, playing different players, and it's interesting as well. Like when they come into us, the Premier League is so kind of diverse in terms of the people playing in it. You've probably got Dutch kids and French kids and German kids and Spanish kids, and they can quite easily at 17, 18 be playing in Premier League academies. They go and get them, these big academies. So the chances are you're playing against kids that may come and want to take your job, and we try and paint that picture for them as well. So it's a tough one, but it's probably one of the only environments where winning and being and success is important for those reasons.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually, the external factors that influence your perception on that. Is really interesting insight. Thanks, Richard. Mark, a lot of us will, I opened by saying, we're all involved in talent development, and of course, you guys both coach at the national team level. Very few of us do that, but a lot of us coach in grassroots. So I've sort of phrased this maybe a little bit controversially, but we'll see. I'm interested, what can grassroots coaches do to provide potentially talented players with the best introduction to the game? And I wonder whether is giving them a love of the game enough, or should we be looking to do more?
I think that should be your cornerstone. Ultimately, you're there to develop. Well, you're not there to really develop people, other than to make them want to come back each week. So I think if you're not doing that, then you can't really do anything else. So that will be a fundamental piece for me. As a parent, if I'm turning up and my son's not enjoying it, then I'd ask real questions. So giving them that love of the game is key. But I also think there's loads of factors that depend on here. If you're just a parent, then that's running a team, but you've got talented players, whatever they might look like at 8, 9, 10, who knows? then there's also pressures on the coach to, just putting on a fun, enjoyable sessions probably might just be what they're capable of. They've done 50 hours at work each week, and it's a bit of a challenge. But you might be a young, aspiring coach who's starting to think, well, actually, what might I need to do in my session to make it better? Essentially, the better the training session, the higher the quality of your practice design. How you might develop opportunities for feedback, be that you giving it, be that encouraging players to speak to each other and work with each other. I think, it's going to vary depending on the type of coach that's leading the session. It's a tough question to ask. I think you can always do more. You can always make things better. So it definitely depends on the demographic of the people that are delivering the sessions. So it will be tough for me to say, yeah, everyone needs to be able to do X, Y, and Z. I think being qualified is a start, because certainly it gives you the benchmark of some of the basics of the how. You would hope, if it's a good qualification, depending on sport, starts to get you to think about stuff that isn't just sort of tell and directive. So particularly starting to evolve coaches to look at helping athletes to be a little bit more autonomous. Even a 4, 5, 6-year-old can give a bit of feedback to another one. So actually you start to just engage them in that process. So little bits like that I think are important. I suppose the other bit is really around developing good values, good behaviours. So good kids. So actually giving them a little bit of struggle, making things a bit difficult for them at times, making them a bit easier at times. So really starting to think about how you might evolve your practice. But again, that links into session design and what you're looking to do. But yeah, the love of the game bits or love of the sport is massive for me. But even below that, just having fun. Like I figured out, I took my we went out yesterday, and obviously I'm a complete coaching geek. And I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and took a rugby ball and a football, but it wasn't about playing rugby and football. It was about playing like cops and robbers and trying to steal the jewel, which was the rugby ball. So a big bit of learning for me is, I've got to really get into the mind of a 2 and a 4-year-old when I'm playing with them. Otherwise, the session won't last for, not the session, but the playtime won't last very long, because they'll pretty quickly lose interest if I'm saying, get your hands up, make a W, not bothered. So it's quite a good sense check for me, playing with the kids and trying to get them to be interested in sport. Whereas at the moment they're interested in superheroes and that sort of stuff. So trying to make the game a bit more akin to that. I think hockey done quite a cool thing with their little kids or small game for kids, and it's just called Hockey Heroes, and everything they do is around superhero challenges and powers and all that sort of stuff. And actually, I'm now, when I look at my kids and think, yeah, they will absolutely love that. They won't love turning up and going, right, we're playing 2v2. That they will not be interested. But particularly around some of those things, I think it's quite cool. But it's also part of the NGB to help support coaches with that, because the people that coach those sessions don't necessarily have hours and hours of time to invest in themselves. So it's how they design the game to help.
Yeah, that was interesting. I think the two things that you sort of mentioned there weren't in a way hockey related. It wasn't about hockey skills, or it wasn't about physicality. You mentioned sort of autonomy and sort of the character and the values. So yeah, very interesting. So look, I'd like to give coaches another opportunity to ask questions. And at this stage, if people have been off screen, off camera for a bit, so if you want to, you might be eating your dinner, and that's absolutely fine. We've had people decorating before, and that's absolutely fine. If you want to put your camera on, go for it, and we'll have a couple more questions from the audience, Chris, and then I'm going to set Richard and Mark the challenge of asking each other a question. Again, that's something that we've stumbled across that works quite well. And then we'll finish with Drew doing his final thoughts for the day. So I'm going to switch to gallery mode on my screen. And if people want to come off camera, on camera, or whichever way it is, you want to put your camera on, that's absolutely fine. Do that as you like. Thanks, Ruth. But Chris, have we got any great questions out there that either you're going to ask on people's behalf or other people are going to ask?
We do. So Samantha Webster, if you want to pop up and ask your one, Sam.
Time.
Hi, my question was kind of answered just then. So the work I do is I'm not a set coach for a certain team. I work with elite athletes, youth athletes, on behaviour management. So making them aware of how they can deal with their schooling, their home life, sporting life, and all their expectations, and managing their well-being in that sense. And then giving them the voice to go and speak to their coaches and to their parents about unrealistic expectations, or how they can become better within their sport, as well as helping grassroots coaches with what you were just saying about making it more fun. How do they can behave, work with kids with behavioural issues and things like that, and making them engaged. At your elite levels, my question is that something that's considered? So I know that in Australia we do a lot of welfare around elite players and their contribution and making sure that they're feeling well within themselves, but a lot of the youth players miss out on that opportunity. I was just wondering if you both feel that that's a necessary thing for youth players, and managing who they are so they become a stronger player.
Who do you want to direct it to first, Sam?
Oh, I don't mind either one. I don't know, whoever feels like they can jump in with that one. I know it was a bit long-winded, sorry.
Richard, do you want to jump in? Because it was kind of one of the things on your spider
Yeah.
diagram.
Yeah, it's a two-pronged approach, I suppose, with our players, because the clubs own our players and we borrow them. So we have to link with our kind of welfare, our education welfare will link with their education welfare to make sure that when players come onto camp, we know anything that we need to know in terms of what the players are going through at that time. You know, you just don't know. I got to be honest, it's something we need to be better at, because there are still things that slip through the cracks in terms of us and better understanding what players are going through when they come into camp with us, so that we can try and better support them. We do have that process, but it's something we certainly need to be better at and take more consideration over. But the clubs, with the inception of what was called Triple P, which happened maybe 7 years ago now, 6-7 years ago with clubs, mm-hmm. it's quite a big part of what the professional football clubs now in England and Wales have to go through in terms mm-hmm. of player well-being, player welfare support. So they, the majority of them, you know, will be very good at that. And with us, it's more about linking the program, so that, like I said, we have a good understanding of what those players are going through when they come into camp, and then also there's a feedback loop for that. So we obviously have one-on-one chats with coaches, with players when they come in terms of expectations. What's the expectation of the club at the moment? What's the expectation for this camp? You know, so we try and manage our situation with them, and then if there are any issues, you know, we obviously use our education welfare officers to manage that, and also to feed back to the clubs and to have that dialogue. You know, but to be honest, it's something that I manage, but I'm far more comfortable in leaving it to the experts to do it. Yep. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think you need to have those people around your camps and around you who are very good at that and understand that at a much deeper level. You know, there's a place for it, definitely.
Thanks,
Richard. Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, we're similar. I think it's definitely, particularly the last 2 or 3 years, it's definitely the forefront of where we're at, and it forms part of taking the individualized approach. If you don't know the background and the history of the player you're working with, then you're not taking an athlete-centered or an individualized approach. So yeah, it's pretty. Some of the stuff, we're mental health first aid trained, so we'll do work around upskilling ourselves around that area, as well as getting better at understanding like the coaching process. So the two are of equal importance. So it's quite a big topic in the UK. So even more so after the last 10 months.
Yes.
Sam, thank you very much for your question. Thank you. Appreciate that. Chris, before I ask Richard and Mark to ask each other a question, Have we got maybe one more?
We do have one more, and it's a nice one to finish on because it's targeted at both. So Lucian, if you want to jump on and ask your question, mate.
Hey guys. Hi Gareth.
Hey Lucian, good to see you. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, same. So yeah, question to you guys. Well, two questions actually, but so first question, what's your biggest challenge or challenges, I guess, with your pathway? Because I'm into canoeing and we've got a really small community. So yeah, different challenges, I guess. And second question, or part B, so you get given a unlimited budget and free reign. So what do you change?
I think the question was that I guess any problems with your pathway at the moment and things that you'd like to change. Is that fair enough, Lucian? Is that a good summary by me?
Yeah.
I actually have my answer, but it's gone. So Richard, if you kick off, I'll just try and trying to listen to what's going on outside.
I'll answer the second one first. If I had an unlimited budget, I would, we'd be far more. I would try and get a situation where we were far more visible at the clubs, and we could link learning better and have better relationships with the clubs. We have decent relationships with most of the clubs, but because we don't have enough bodies, really, we have to be very kind of we have to be selective in terms of how much we monitor certain players in certain clubs, and we have to be quite strategic around that. But I would love to be able to just not have that worry and have enough people out there. We have a talent ID and obviously a scouting network that work for us. But I mean, I would like to have a group of people who would just, their job was going and working with all of the clubs that all our international players playing, and really having brilliant relationships with them, linking learning better, having more conversations with the coaches, more conversations around the well-being and the psychological support for the players. I would like to have that at a much higher level. And the second thing I'd like to do then is have a better games program, have a more diverse games program. Come and play Australia. Do you know what I mean? Come and play, go and play the African nations, go and play the South American nations, or go get to tournaments more often where we played, not just European teams, and have those experiences for the players. So again, it's all about opportunity, all about, gaining experiences. So I would probably do a lot more of that in terms of supporting our national pathway, And the challenges within the pathway are always going to be, for me, finance is always one, resource is always one, and time. Do you know what I mean? Time with the players. It's always a big challenge. We, at under 17, under 19, 21, those age groups, then there are international windows, obviously, where players come in, and it's the games program and the training program at the clubs. It becomes less, and the international players will come out. But before that, we work on relationships. So if we want players to come out under 15, under 16, we have to have good relationships with the club so that they can come out. So a challenge for us is always that, again, that relationship with the clubs that the players play at, to make sure that they understand that all we want to do is add value to the players' experience. And it's really interesting as it happens. We've asked questions of the clubs in terms of the feedback that they want from us, because we always give feedback. We give individual feedback, we give club feedback, and none of them ask for technical and tactical feedback. None of the clubs. They want to know, did they integrate properly? So when they come into ours, did they integrate properly from a social perspective? And were they good lads? Did they toe the line? Did they work hard? Did they commit, like, in terms of everything that's expected? They want to know those things. They don't really want to know what we did with them technically and tactically, because that's kind of ever changing anyway. I mean, they just want to know, were they good lads? Did they behave? So things like that. So those the major challenge for us is time and being able to go and have those relationships with the clubs that are really meaningful and important.
You, Mark?
Fair enough.
Yeah, so many similar things, really. I think so. I won't necessarily touch on what I do with the budget, because it's more of everything. But from one of the key things that is a real sort of is a struggle in our pathway is around just the volume of stakeholders. So we're not a professional sport, so we have quite a high proportion of players that go to independent private schools. We have a pathway. We then have the NAGS program, and the pathway runs alongside it for those that are in and not in. Then we have a clubs program, and within the clubs, there's sort of adult teams which they'll play in, but also the junior age group teams which they play in. So suddenly there's so many different people pulling and pushing in different ways for over a period of time. And I think part of what we're looking to do is really streamline our talent system, so we potentially don't have one of those elements, so that we can, don't have as much pressures on players. So that will be a key thing for us to try and get right. And obviously unlimited budget. There's you try and do more of everything with more. So it's quite simple.
Thanks, Mark. Lucian, thank you very much for your question.
That's awesome.
Richard and Mark, I did set yourself the challenge. I didn't warn you. I always mean to warn the panelists, but I always forget. But I just wondered whether Richard, you've got any questions for Mark, or Mark, you've got a question for Richard. Don't feel you have to, but if you've got one that you'd be quite interested in.
That's one is something I'm trying to get to across sports. One of my roles is to, certainly domestically, is to support the development of kids around the age of between 9 and 12. That kind of skill acquisition phase. And we've recently started with our Cymru Leagues academies. We've recently started to support them. They've had some funding coming from UEFA. So we can have some more full-time people working at semi-pro clubs, So within Wales, in the program, it's not a challenge for us because they're in games programs, they're in regular coaching, So what are your thoughts around that kind of those ages of that kind of under 9 to under 12 area? How do you support the players? Are there certain things that you may do specifically in those age groups to support the development of kids at that age?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We probably isn't that many under 9, under 10 hockey players kicking around that play to the volume that you would probably see in football. So I think it's not that comparable. If you look over to the continent, then the training age of players over there is at that age is like massive compared to what it is in the UK. So I've got a colleague who's recently come over from Belgium, and their son, who played sort of B team at under 10s in Belgium, is like light years ahead of everybody over here, just because of his like 3, 4, 5 sessions a week that he would do, whereas over here he's lucky if he gets one. So I'm not necessarily too sure on that, but I think I suppose the key bit around that would be working with quite simply working with the coaches to help them understand what they can do with those players a little bit better. So how they can make sort of competition within their training sessions. So how they're matching people up when they play against each other, really getting to understand this, albeit they're quite in the infancy, strengths of each player, to be able to match them up to create that competition within the session. But yeah, from an under 9, under 10 perspective, it's probably not really my forte, and hockey doesn't necessarily have a massive amount of under 9 and 10s. It sort of gets serious for us around 11, and by serious, more organised. You won't find anything really that organised below, just because of the size of the sport. Really, most of them are playing football, which is the issue.
I know, it's simple, I suppose. I set up jumpers for goalposts in football, isn't it?
Yeah. You need a like £1 million hockey pitch to play anything decent for us.
Tougher, yeah. I think about that really.
So, Mark, how about you?
My question would be is just really the whole how are you going to get more out of players in Wales? So I played senior international hockey for Wales, but I'm English to a certain degree. Well, obviously I have Welsh heritage. And it was a similar sort of thing for us that 90% of the team lived in England and played in the Premier League, and just my question would be really around how, because you've still got people in those areas. It's what's the drive? Probably quite a big question for 2 minutes.
Yeah, we've got to support the domestic game. There's always the amount of players that actually go and make it as professional footballers, never mind international professional footballers, is so small that we have to have that kind of feedback loop back into Wales. Loads of kids will go, especially in the north, because the proximity to the the big Northwest clubs, in that area, Manchester, Liverpool, even the Midlands, Midlands is close as well. So we get a lot of kids that go out to Wales quite early to go and play in those big clubs. To be honest, this is what we want. By a certain point, you need to have those kids going out into those clubs and having that experience playing those games programs. That's from a purely, I suppose, selfish perspective from an international game coach. I need my players to be playing Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3 football in England, or further afield, if they're playing in Europe, or we've got some kids playing in Spain, I think. So we need that. But then the players, they're not all going to make it. There's a really small amount of kids going to actually go and make it. So they'll come back into the domestic game in Wales. So it's really important that the domestic game in Wales is functioning and is doing its bit. So number one, in the development of kids before they go and do that. But number two, then hopefully they come back into their clubs at a later date. So we've been quite lucky recently. Some money's been found through UEFA, through TV licensing, where the players in the top league, the players who play for the academies in the top league in Wales, they've kind of pretty much tripled their funding overnight per year. So we've put heads of coaching into all of those clubs. So they've got a full-time head of coaching in each of those 12 clubs now. So this is only the last 18 months. So obviously the fruits of that labour is going to be seen, in 5 years' time, I would have thought. What we need to know is in 5 years' time that money is starting to work. You're looking at probably about just over a million euros really coming into those 12 clubs, not each, across the 12 clubs. So we've been able to put full-time people in there. So then, the skill acquisition, that area of 9 to 12s now, we tried to delve down into that a little bit. We've upped the games program in those clubs. So the games program now, COVID and the coronavirus has stuttered that, obviously, but the games program is bigger. In some of those age groups, Cardiff, Swansea, Wrexham, Newport are going to come into play against those in those age groups as well. So we're trying to link that professional game to our semi-pro game in Wales. And also, what my next job, and this is part of what I've been doing over the last couple of months, is we want to support those clubs further, in terms of their players. So we want them to come to us and tell us what do you want us to help you, what do you want us to do to help you educate your players moving forward. So we want to have a bit of a cohesive approach to all those heads of coaching, so that they support us in building specific education for those age groups within those clubs. Which is the next thing really, but it has to start there, and then each of those clubs hopefully then has a knock-on effect into their areas and the grassroots into their areas. So we want them to be running coach education in their area at that hub club, and then a bit like Australia really. I did quite a lot of that at Manly. When I was working at Manly, it wasn't just about the first team; it was also about supporting the local area in terms of coach education. And what we really tried to do when we were there was try and get a first team that was far more representative of that area of Sydney, So sorry guys, hang on.
The sun's coming out, Richard.
So yeah, I think you've got to try and support them coach education wise, and try and help them improve the games program, make sure that they've got that provision when kids come back in, maybe from the pro game back into the domestic game, to give them a good experience. And obviously keep supporting the coaches and through the coach education and through any kind of CPD that we can. It's tough.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, look, Mark and Richard, I know we've gone over time, so please don't feel that you've got to stay on. What we're going to do now is I'm going to set Drew the difficult task of the main takeaways, and then I'm going to tell people about what's up and coming. And the final thing would be for me to thank you both. So if you've got to go, that's absolutely fine. And look, if you do, we really appreciate your time and your expertise. So thank you very much, guys.
Cheers, guys. I've got a 9:30, so apologies.
No, thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Yeah. We're gonna wrap up in the next couple of minutes, but you can definitely disappear. You've done your hard work. Thanks, Mark. Pleasure.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Drew. Obviously, time is pressing, and there's loads. But I saw Chris set people the challenge of 3 main takeaways. Have you? Can you succeed in that challenge? You're now on mute, Drew.
There we go. All right. I don't know if I'll succeed with the challenge, but I'll attempt it, and I'll do it quickly. Here we go. number one, a flexible curriculum based on the needs of players, but able to adapt to the evolution of the tactical demands of the game. Number two, the importance of parents, parent education, and remembering that it's probably the parents' first time being in those environments too. And third, that probably at all levels, it's important that we remember that the main things we're trying to do is help players fall in love with the game and stay in love with the game, but that probably also occurs for what we should be doing for coaches and trying to help them through all the levels to make sure that they also stay connected to the game so they can help drive player development.
That's true. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to just quickly share my screen just to say what the plan is for next week. Does that work, Drew? Yeah, lovely. We're going to keep going for as long as we're needed or wanted. So please do tell us if you want us to carry on. We have a session next week. There's still some elements that need to be confirmed. So we're looking at analysing your team player opposition. Again, we're going massive topic, and we'll see what comes out of it. But we've got hopefully 3 excellent performance analysts, opposition analysts to join us. A couple need to be confirmed. So apologies if the panel looks a little bit different next week, but that's what we're hoping for. So as always, I will let people know what's happening via the usual social media and emails out. So look, it's been great to be back. I think I've missed it actually. So it's been great to be back on the Monday Night Coaches Club. I really enjoy having the opportunity to speak to our panelists and always blown away by their ability to articulate what they do and why they do it. And that's always a common thread with whoever we have on. And that's when we know that we've got excellent panelists. So I'd like, in Mark's absence, I'd like to thank him very much for giving up his time and coming on a largely football webinar and sharing what hockey does. And Richard, I'd really like to thank you for your time and sharing really candidly what goes on in those national camps and the vision and practices that's happening in Wales. Sounds like there's loads of exciting work and sounds like you have a massive job. So thank you very much, Richard.
Yeah, no problem. It's been good. It's been interesting.
Really appreciate it. And all that leads me to do is obviously thank Chris and Drew as always, but also to thank all the coaches that joined us. It's great to see familiar faces, new faces, and even ex-panelists coming back to listen to the Monday Night Coaches Club. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope you're all safe and well, and we'll hopefully see as many of you next week, same time, same place, I think. But I'll be in touch. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye. Have a good evening or a good rest of your day.
Hey, guys. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Bye.
See everyone. Thanks, Gareth. Bye, guys.